This is a continuation of the reading of chapter 7 from the book The Meta and Physics of Jesus Christ. The title of chapter 7 is Jesus Christ is Who? This is part 3 of chapter 7. Part 3 of chapter 7. I am going to continue from the last paragraph I read in part 2 of chapter 7 and continue on into part 3 of chapter 7. They were ancient Jews who already had a deep belief in God and were already acquainted with the stories of God's works on earth from the past through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses, not to mention Melchizedek. Now, the Greek text describes this as the Father abiding in him or living in him. In other words, that the life force of the Father is alive inside of him. I want you to observe something of great significance here. There are places in the Greek text where Christ is telling them to believe into him, as in John 3:16. What is this saying about belief and about what Christ is? Not only that, but also about belief and faith. If you see belief or faith as a substance, just as Paul describes it, then you can easily see that it is a projection into or going in or entering the real life force of the Christ. Then in verse 12, and this is in the Greek, he believing into me, the works which I do, shall he do also, and greater than these shall he do, because I am going to the Father. And whatever you ask in my name, this will I do, so that the Father be glorified in the Son. Okay, that was a quote from the Christ. Now he's talking about creator of all. Creator of all. What we now think of as God in this time, in this day and age, we think of God as creator of all. That's what he's talking about, creator of all. Okay? Creator of all. Very important to understand, especially today. Here, he is spelling out the physics of how they managed to do all that they did. Let's take this deeper. We are talking about miracles and great wisdom. You see in verse 13 where he's talking about his name, we discussed earlier how names in the unseen realms of heaven actually denote the station of power and authority. That would be the seat of power. He is saying to merge the power of belief or faith, merge the power of faith into the substance of the name, his name. It is about projecting the substance of faith and that substance becoming the conduit of the energy to enter them, to abide in them, to live in them. Then he is saying, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. This word glorified is always referring to the emanating radiation of the energy. In other words, it's like what's radiating. If we were talking about the glory of a being, okay, let's say the glory of an angel, it's talking about the thing that's radiating off. The energy is radiating off it. The light is radiating off of it. That is the glory. That's what the glory is. It really is a solid, concrete physics word. But because we're dealing in energy and physics, the word is a physics word. In this case, the energy is the force of the first cause or creator of all. So he is talking about completing a connection of an energy circuit. This is done by believing or faithing into, projecting the power of thought into the original substance. Then he says in verse 17, this is in the Greek, the Spirit of truth, which the world cannot receive because it beholds it not, nor knows it. But you know it because it abides in you and will be in you. In the scripture here, he discusses the physics of the Comforter. That would be the Holy Spirit, or what the Greek calls another helper. He says the world, which is actually the consciousness, vibration of the world system of doing things and thinking things, they can't see it and therefore cannot know it or receive it. Then tells them that they themselves, the people he's talking to, they know it. And this word know is in a biblical sense as in union or going inside to become one, because they experience it, because it abides in them. That the world will not make the connection, so how can they, that would be the ones locked into the consciousness, vibration, and frequency of the world system of doing and thinking, how can they experience it? He's explaining it to them. So a little sidebar note here for 2022. In the world we live in right now, a lot of mocking is taking place into the subject matter that I'm talking about right now, into the subject matter that we all know. And just understand, this is why the mocking is taking place. Just go back and listen to the last 3 minutes of what I'm saying right now, and you'll see, why is all this madness taking? Well, this is why. It was just explained by Jesus Christ himself, okay, way long time ago. Okay, back to the text. We see them, that would be the disciples, pulling off miracle after miracle, which is higher physics and the results of higher physics. We see them connecting to the great wisdom which alters lives and brings great internal peace, not to even mention heightened consciousness and enlightenment. Just in case the Bible isn't enough for you, then look at the early Christian writings that have been discovered, and also at Roman history. Look specifically at Polycarp, the bishop of the church of Smyrna. You want the gears of your mind to turn? Check this stuff out. I'm not making this up. This is evidence here. Even though they had no clue what physics was, history shows us that they practiced it with tremendous results. Christ knew his own physics, what Christ actually is. He knew how things work because he, or it from the Greek, is the designer. He, or it from the Greek, is the creative agent. It from the Greek, or he, is the universal life force. Let's take a peek at chapter 17 of John. I might have to do a whole bunch of quoting here because I know human nature can get sort of lazy, and I want you to get this. Otherwise, I would just tell you to read it. You guys are making me work. What you are going to see here is cool. We are going to pull this from the Greek so that we miss nothing here. Now, remember what we saw a couple of pages back when Christ was describing in the verses of 12 and 13 in John 1 about giving the authority to become the offspring of Creator of all. This is more of the physics of that. It would be rather unfortunate if you didn't believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God. But even if you don't, you have to believe that what is recorded is in non-religious history is at least factual. Okay, because we're talking Roman history and other history that's not religious. There's no religio-political shenanigans going on in that history. It's not the church history, but it's the factual history of what went down because of all the witnesses that happened in those times. Well, the guys that were writing this stuff are the same guys that were doing miracles, telling us how they were doing it. Their work was not written till later in time, but it was their work. This you cannot deny. There is no denying that these people, the early Christians, were doing these things. Nor is there any denying that they went, some of them, to their deaths, rather than to turn their backs on their faith substance and the result of that substance. I would say these were powerful experiences they were having. How could they turn their backs when the evidence and the experience was real enough to alter and work rather outside the known understanding of the laws of that common era? Just that one point alone should be more than enough to get you thinking. Now, back to John. We're going to read from 17. Let's start in the first verse, chapter 17 from John in the first verse. Jesus spoke these things and lifted up his eyes to heaven. Let me give you a small interlude here. This is just a small note here. Notice he was praying to the creator of all here, and his posture in doing so, up to heaven, looking up. Hey, there's no limitations with this guy, none. Okay, take a lesson. Back to the scripture. And said, Father, the hour is come, glorify thy Son, that the Son may glorify thee, as thou didst give me authority over all flesh, so that everything which thou hast given to him he may give to them, even Ionian life. That would be what we call everlasting life, or higher dimensional life. That's Ionian life. And this is the Ionian life, that they may know thee, the only true creator of all, and him who thou didst send, Jesus Christ. Now, I ponder this. Why was he talking about himself in the third party? This has always been a question of mine. Maybe I will get the answer before we are through with this part. Okay, back to the text. We're in verse 4 now. Verse 4. I glorify thee on earth, having finished the work thou hast given me, that I might do it. And now, O Father, glorify thou me with thyself, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was. Okay, now pause for a second. I want you to think about how seriously heavy and full of mystery that last line we read actually was. And that was verse 5. I'm about to read verse 6 now. But that was heavy and filled with mystery. Now verse 6. I manifested thy name to the men whom thou hast given me out of the world. Thine they were, and thou hast given them to me, and they have kept thy word. Okay, now let's skip to verse 9. I entreat for them not for the world I entreat, but for those whom thou hast given me, because they are thine, and all mine are thine, and thine are mine, and I have been glorified in them. And I am no more in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to thee. Holy Father, keep them in thy name, by which thou hast given them me, that they may be one, as we also are one. You say, oh, he's telling something really super deep and really super mystical, and really super energy, physics related. I mean, man, this is actually mind-blowing stuff. If you pause for a minute and put your head into physics and think about it, this is mind-blowing stuff. Could anybody understand it way back then? Heck no. Can we understand it in 2022? Heck yes. What are we looking at here? What are we seeing? We are seeing that the same exact kind of relationship that Christ has with the Father is being duplicated being duplicated with his disciples, in other words, the apostles. That included the physics and the meta and the connections with the higher dimensions. Now, the real question is this: how could a regular divine man pull off something like this and get historically documented results that we see in the early Christians? And I'm talking about very early Christians. The answer to that question is very simple. And that is, Christ is no regular divine teacher like the Buddha 500 years before him, or like Lao Tzu from another culture. Those other beings, those other humans, they were very enlightened and were on very high level paths of light, or light paths. To take anything away from that and call it silly little names because your pastor does is not very Christ-like, nor is it very enlightened. These things were God in action and serving a need of that place and that time. To be ignorant of that is folly. It's religio-political folliness. Those guys that I was referring to are mortals who receive the divine touch, whereas Christ is the embodied manifestation of the divine touch. Is this not plain? Is this not clear? Now, I personally do not hold a lot of stock in the great spiritual teachers that were forming religions after the Christ. That's my own personal thing. But I also have to tell you that I do not know what kind of culture and belief the Middle Eastern people practiced at the time of Muhammad. Maybe it is that they needed to curb some of the barbarism toward their women folk. These are the descendants of Ishmael, and God had a different agenda for them than he did for Isaac, and that would be Yahweh. When I talk about God, that would be Yahweh. Who knows? As descendants of Ishmael, they are not considered Gentiles either. Neither are the Chinese Asians Gentiles. Okay, enough of my sidestepping what we are looking at. Let's get back to it. In verse 15, I entreat not that thou wouldst take them out of the world, but thou wouldst keep them from evil. They are not of the world, as I am not of the world. Now, he's talking about an energy substance here, not of the world system. It has a certain energy substance. The people and himself are not part of that energy substance he's talking about here. Think frequencies, think physics. Think about the vibrational frequency that these things are resonating at. Think about all the things he said. I mean, this world is not of it. That kind of stuff. Think about this. Verse 18, as thou didst send me into the world, so I send them into the world. And then it goes on from there. And it really is something to see and read for yourselves. Do you see the correlation here as it applies to physics? I mean, we are talking about a very serious and powerful energy science at work. It was enough to throw the whole of the Roman Empire into shock. I mean, into shock, kind of a shock. Something so powerful as to impact several cultures of different people all at once. The only thing we can even begin to compare it to in this generation is the atomic bomb. Can you see what we are dealing with? We are not talking about some man that came up with a religion. There's plenty of that stuff. We're not talking about that. The religion came about because of the total reality of the evidence. The evidence was made real because we had someone down on this planet training people in the physics of the universe itself. And he was also telling them to look outside their religion for the higher truth. It was a thing of science. It was a thing of physics. And let me ask you this, and this is from a very, very long time ago. As I'm reading this, I'm realizing I'm actually reading in 2022, And I'm not sure if you'll be familiar with this name or not, but you should look her up on the computer. And why does the energy work? I mean, even in our day, we have people like the late Catherine Kuhlman. She was a little crazy looking if you see the footage of her, but nonetheless, she was highly effective. And there were others also who are doing the spiritual side of the physics of Jesus Christ. These people I mentioned are not perfect by any means, but they have been used as conduits for the works of God from a higher dimension. Think physics, please. These are miraculous works. This does not even take into consideration the trained scientists and physicists who are researching the other, more physical material side of the physics of Jesus Christ. The whole universe is a product of the true essence and real identity of the divine being we think of as Jesus Christ. Its energies and its sciences are the physics and the meta of what the Christ is. Its true spirituality, the knowledge of the Creator of all, operates through the real physics of the Christ. We may not see this at all when we look at the Christ. In fact, we may even look to the divine man of Jesus Christ or to some mapped out religion, as in organized religion, that actually takes us away from seeing this, with all of its religio-politics of agendas of this thing and that thing and that thing and this thing. However, this way I just described to you is the way that way too many people see Jesus Christ in terms of religio-politics and in terms of organized institutional religion. And it is folly. It is folly. I mean, how can you project the substance of faith into something that is there just to cover your bases and your asses? This is a scriptural word, by the way, asses. So don't freak out, just in case you might go to hell. How can you get the results that are promised to you by thinking and projecting the real substance of your thoughts into a real energy that you will not conceive of? Well, you can't. People have not stopped attending church because they have ceased to believe in God. It is simply all too ingrained in their psyches for this to be possible. In fact, it is quite the contrary. People have stopped attending churches because the churches simply are not meeting their needs of real and tangible connection that they desire to have with Creator of all. If you could get this in church, it would be standing room only. People would come in droves to discover the physics and have a real connection. This is what people want. Actually, this is what people need, and they know it. But where is it? In what time frame do you think we are living in anyways? This is not the 1800s. It is not even 1950 anymore. This is the 21st century, and people are getting much more sophisticated. Do you see what we are looking at here? We are looking at pure energy. The pure energy of creation. The physics behind that energy. Notice the Greek describes the thing as it. This is the Christ. This is who the guy really is. This is what it is all about. This should lead us to another point, and that point would be that Christ is the way of things. All the other ways of things that we practice and know are merely contained within the big picture. God's thread on earth has been running on earth far beyond the last 2,000 years. And it is truth that no one can get to the Father without going through this being, this Christ, you can't. It's part of the makeup. It's part of the way of things. It is scientifically an impossibility because we are dealing with life force, because we're dealing with life force source here. Of course this is true, but this other stuff about you are going straight to hell if you do not become a Christian is just a strategy from a time far, far away from where we are now. You can look this up in history. I'm not joking you. Look up the papal bull of 1302, and the guy's name's Pope Boniface, and I think it's Boniface the Eighth, if I'm not mistaken. He's the one that came out and declared this in 1302. He wrote a papal bull, and when the Pope writes a papal bull, since the Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth, then if you're Catholic, which everyone was back in those days, you can't argue with the Pope. You'll probably get killed or imprisoned. It wasn't a joke. It was politics. Hardcore religio-politics back in those days. And that was Europe. That's how America got here, by the way. Now, and I also have to say this because I'm probably saying some things that I'm definitely saying things that are going to freak out Christians because they heard it all their lives. So I have to say this too, and that's regardless of the interpretation in Revelation 20 verses 12 through 15 about the lake of fire. You see, it greatly misses the point of what we here in the 21st century are capable of understanding and harnessing. And I'm talking about all that fear stuff to scare you into something. You don't need to be scared into something. There's power. Just come and get it. Come to the power and use it, please. That other stuff greatly misses the point because it misses the understanding of what it is we are dealing with here. It is a fact that if you have a lower nature, what Paul calls a sin nature, as part of who you are, that would be a sin nature. It is a fact that this nature is designed to be unenlightened and self-centered to the greatest degree. It is also a fact that your thoughts have a tremendous amount of power. It is a fact that you have choices and free will to direct those thoughts in any direction that suits you. It is a fact that the structure of the world we live in and the earth we live as part of or live on have specific designs. It is also a sad fact that we do not yet understand those designs. It is a fact that what is known as the way is the science or knowledge and high physics that will lead to total harmony within the specifications of those designs and the designs of us as mortals inhabiting this planet. The time we are all living in right now is a time when we can grasp the understanding of these things, a time to put away unenlightened interpretations and operate out of enlightenment. The universe is a place of glory and life of what the Christ actually is. And whether we take the time and effort to understand this, and most importantly, tap into it, is up to each of us. Whether we do this or not is most relevant to each of us personally. Understanding that whatever the Christ actually is has been running on this planet for a heck of a lot longer than any religion called Christianity has been even dreamed up by mortals. Knowing this is very, very good beginning. This main theme runs throughout our holy book and even goes back into Genesis. The truth of this stares us in the face daily, and now is the time to begin to look back at what it is that is looking at us. Life for humans is all about consciousness energy, and vibrational frequency. Life for humans has always been about choices within the confines of a war that still rages between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. One more thought to leave with you. It really is getting late in the game, and it is time to simply wake up and pursue enlightenment. If the form of religion you grew up with will not supply you with this, then go outside your religion and get it as Christ force directly and wake up. The war will not stop between light and darkness, and operating in an unenlightened consciousness, energy, and vibrational frequency system is not in your best interest and not what the light is helping you to battle for. Beginning to reach an understanding that God is God, and we're talking creator of all is creator of all, and that is that, regardless of whether or not we fully comprehend it. The beginning is the beginning of tapping the power of this thing. And also that just because a church calls itself Christian church does not mean it is tied to God and feeding your enlightenment. Reaching this point is the sign that you are waking up. This is the end of chapter 7. We will commence the reading in chapter 8.